Welcome to this Masterclass Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here. Today, we're taking a structured, step-by-step journey to demystify some of the most dense, yet absolutely fascinating macroeconomic theories out there. If you've ever wondered how government spending, central bank interest rates, and global trade all kind of just crash together to shape our world, well, you're in the exact right place. I'm your guide for today, and together we're going to build our understanding from the ground up to make sure every single concept really locks into place. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our syllabus for today's tiered class. We're going to start with level 1, which covers the basics of a closed economy. From there, we'll level up to the intermediate stage, where we actually open the borders. And finally, level 3, the advanced section, where we synthesize the whole shebang using the Mundell-Fleming model. All right, let's kick off our foundational class. Level 1, the basics of the closed economy. So in a basic, closed economy, governments typically rely on fiscal and monetary levers. Things like adjusting spending or having the central bank tweak interest rates to keep growth steady. But sometimes, this classic model hits a massive brick wall. So the crucial point here is understanding what we call a liquidity trap. Just imagine the central bank keeps lowering the interest rate to stimulate the economy, trying to get people and businesses to borrow and spend. But then, the rate literally hits zero. You can't really have negative nominal interest rates, right? I mean, if you could borrow $100 and only pay back 95, we'd all want infinite money. When the rate hits this zero lower bound, people are perfectly happy just hoarding cash. At this point, printing more money does absolutely nothing to lower rates any further. Conventional monetary policy just becomes totally powerless. And look, this isn't just textbook theory. It's modern history. Let's look back at the Great Recession. In August 2007, the federal funds rate was sitting at 5%. As the economy started to crash, the Fed aggressively slashed rates to fight the downturn, dropping them down to 2% by August 2008. But by August 2009, they had essentially hit rock bottom at 0.16%. That is effectively zero. They were in a for-real liquidity trap. Because conventional interest rate cuts were totally maxed out, the Fed was forced into some highly unorthodox maneuvers. We're talking massive quantitative easing, basically buying up huge quantities of financial assets to try and pump liquidity directly into the system. Okay, let's do a really quick class summary to lock in level 1 before we move on. Basically, fiscal and monetary policies are your primary tools to stabilize a domestic economy. But we also have to remember that when the government spends heavily, it can cause interest rates to rise, which displaces or crowds out private investment. And finally, if interest rates hit zero, bam, the economy falls into a liquidity trap, forcing central banks to use unconventional actions because standard rate cuts are completely off the table. Got it? Great. Let's move along and see how this builds. Welcome to Level 2, Intermediate, where we dive into the open economy. So now, we are no longer operating in a vacuum. We are officially opening the borders to international trade and finance. Now, a massive concept in this open economy is the real exchange rate, which basically measures a country's competitiveness. And that brings us right to purchasing power parity, or PPP for short. Think of this theory as the ultimate economic equalizer. It states that eventually, in the long run, your money should have the exact same purchasing power regardless of where you are in the world. So, if you exchange your dollars for euros, those euros should buy you roughly the same basket of goods in Europe that your dollars would have bought back home. If things are way cheaper abroad, people will naturally start buying from abroad, and those market forces will eventually shift the exchange rate until the prices align. And this brilliantly illustrates how the theory works, and honestly doesn't work, in practice. Let's compare a 6-inch Subway club sandwich. In 1999, that sandwich cost the equivalent of $3.30 in Dublin, Ireland, compared to $3.09 in Seattle. Pretty small gap, right? But jump forward to 2010, after Ireland adopted the euro. That same Dublin sandwich was $5.27, while the Seattle one was $4.68. The Irish sandwich had become noticeably more expensive in real terms. So why did that happen? Well, because while PPP definitely holds in the very long run, things like transportation costs, local taxes, and the simple fact that you can't easily commute to Dublin just for a cheaper lunch mean that real exchange rates can and do deviate significantly for years at a time. Now, let's shift gears and look at how money, rather than sandwiches, moves around. This right here is the transmission mechanism of capital mobility. Step 1. Let's say domestic interest rates shift upward. Step 2. Global investors, like big portfolio managers, are constantly out there shopping for the highest yields. They see those higher rates, so they instantly move their capital across borders into that country to take advantage. And step 3, to invest there, they obviously have to buy that country's currency. This massive surge in demand causes the exchange rate to adjust, meaning the currency appreciates, which then balances the global payments. It really shows how financial markets link global economies together incredibly fast. Time for our intermediate class summary. Here's what you need to remember. Open economies are deeply linked via trade, which is tracked in the current account, and finance, which is tracked in the capital account. Also, if a country uses fixed exchange rates, its central bank has to constantly step in, buying and selling currency to maintain that peg. But if they use floating rates, they just stand aside and let the market dictate the value. And lastly, while local factors definitely cause short-term bumps, purchasing power parity is the gravitational force driving exchange rates over the long haul.
You've made it! Welcome to Level 3, Advanced, where we tackle the Mundell-Fleming model.
All right, we are now going to synthesize everything we've learned to see what actually happens when we introduce the ultimate economic accelerator. The core of this advanced level rests on the assumption of perfect capital mobility. Just imagine a world where investors can buy stocks or bonds anywhere on the planet instantly, super cheaply, and in massive, completely unlimited amounts. Under these specific conditions, a single country simply cannot have an interest rate that's different from the rest of the world. If a country tries to raise its rate even slightly above the world average, a literal tsunami of global capital will flood in to capture that higher yield. And if they lower it, the capital immediately flees. Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is how it serves as the ultimate cheat sheet for the Mundell-Fleming framework. It shows us exactly when policies actually work based on the exchange rate system, assuming perfect capital mobility. First, look at fixed exchange rates. Here, monetary policy is completely powerless. Why? Because any attempt to change the money supply forces the central bank to intervene to save the currency peg, completely reversing their own action. But fiscal policy? It is incredibly powerful. Now, flip over to flexible exchange rates. It is the exact opposite. Monetary policy becomes incredibly powerful here because the resulting currency depreciation actually boosts exports, but fiscal expansion becomes totally powerless. Think about it. Increased government spending raises interest rates, which then attracts foreign capital, which appreciates the currency, which ultimately kills your exports. It completely crowds out the domestic stimulus. Let's actually apply this to a real historical event. The year is 1990. The Berlin Wall has fallen, and Germany is in the process of reunifying. The West German government launched a massive fiscal expansion, basically spending huge amounts of money to rebuild East Germany. Because of this massive fiscal stimulus, the German economy overheated, prompting their central bank, the Bundesbank, to hike interest rates to fight inflation. Now remember our framework. At the time, many European neighbors had their exchange rates fixed to the German mark. So, to defend their currency pegs against those higher German rates, countries like France and Italy were forced to raise their own interest rates, even though their economies definitely didn't have the benefit of a fiscal boom. So, Germany's domestic policy inadvertently caused severe economic slowdowns for its neighbors. Wild, right? Okay, let's lock in this final masterclass summary. Under fixed exchange rates with high capital mobility, central banks entirely lose their ability to conduct independent monetary policy. However, fiscal policy becomes highly effective. Conversely, if you have floating exchange rates, monetary policy is empowered mostly because it depreciates the currency and boosts exports, while fiscal policy is essentially neutralized because a stronger currency crowds out those very same exports. Honestly, massive congratulations on grasping this. It is incredibly dense material. But our masterclass ends with a bit of a challenging thought. We just saw that under floating rates, a country can use monetary policy to lower its interest rates, depreciate its currency, and boost its own exports. This shifts global demand toward their goods, which is great for creating jobs at home. But it comes at the direct expense of other nations, whose goods are now relatively more expensive. This dynamic is known as a beggar-thy-neighbor policy. So I leave you with this question. In a deeply interconnected global economy, does a desperate need for domestic recovery actually justify a policy that cures one economy by essentially exporting its unemployment to the rest of the world? It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the dynamics around you.